It's a lot of fun, right? You're like, no, it's not. I could be doing so much better things with my day off.
If I was home on my day off, I'd still be talking with someone about World War II ships.
That's fair. Yeah. Except now you got me.
Shoot, you might be the person I would be talking to.
Probably, just over text. So this works out.
Because the English gentleman's on a different time zone. I'll text him today and I'll hear back tomorrow.
I know. It's hard to get like a rhythm going.
It's more of a correspondence than a conversation.
Exactly. Yeah. And, the English gentleman has a child and responsibilities, adult responsibilities.
Thank God we're only responsible for a couple of books and a old steel boat.
Yeah, exactly. Though you make my responsibility seem small compared to the old steel boat. Anyway, should we talk about this week's topic? This month's topic? Not this week, this afternoon, this day? I don't know. I don't know what day it is.
I'm ready. What's it going to be this time around?
So in the last episode, we talked about maybe ships that the United States Navy produced but didn't need, or ships that, lines that maybe didn't need. And this brought up an interesting question. As we go into the future with the new Ford class carriers, so obviously Gerald R. Ford, JFK-2, Enterprise-2. Oh, sorry, I skipped over
Doris Miller.
Dory Miller. Oh my God, is this the third episode in a row where you're going to say Doris and I'm going to say Dory?
I'm pretty sure the ship is named Doris and not Dory.
I've always heard of Dory Miller.
That's how the histories refer to him, but I'm pretty sure the ship is...
Okay. And then Enterprise 2, and then,
Enterprise.
Oh God, you're the worst. And then there was a bunch of, and then Biden was like, we're going to name one George Bush and
they did just
another one.
So there will be an H.W. Bush and a W.
Clinton.
Bush. Oh, and
a
Clinton,
Clinton. And I'm like, oh my God, Trump should just cancel those halls and rename them something else. I don't care what side of the aisle that you, viewer, are on. You got to stop naming carriers after presidents. Like,
at least if you name them after some normal politician, it's helping get more carriers built.
I could make a slight argument for a George, the second George Bush.
W. Bush. He was in the Air Force Reserve.
Yeah. Okay. Not so much Bill, but at this point, we should be done with president carriers. Okay. Give me a Lexington.
A couple of presidents like your Kennedy who served in the Navy.
Sure.
There's a reason to name ships after him. Maybe not the premier capital ships, arguably.
Sure.
But yeah, bring back some of those classic names.
That's what you need to do, especially as you're gearing up for a potential conflict with China. Ryan. I'm so sorry. I'm getting us canceled. Okay. Jack is a libertarian. He votes third party. I'm just kidding.
Stop throwing your vote away.
That's also a lie. We've just been canceled. They're now the comments are on fire. Anyway.
Would you believe it if I told you that I'm all about that primary vote? So I switch from one party to the other depending on which primary election I want to vote in?
Sounds about right. What were we even talking about? We haven't even started this episode yet. We're already... Okay. Ford class carriers. Are they the end of the line for the evolution of Navy fleet carrier? Is sort of the lineage that was started in World War II and sort of that build up in the in the pre-war, and then sort of the path that was set during World War II. Now that we're at Ford, is that the end of the line? So will we finally realize that we need smaller and cheaper? Again, nothing's ever cheap. Okay. Do we need smaller and cheaper carriers in the future? And will a a conflict like another Pacific War teach us that? So, do you have thoughts?
I absolutely have thoughts.
All right, well, let's roll the intro, and then we'll be right back and actually get the show on the road.
So just in favor of doing a shorter episode, no, these will not be the last supercarriers. I've got 2 reasons for that. We'll get to that in a second.
Okay.
Yes, we are going to build smaller, cheaper, lighter carriers, and it will take another war to teach us we need to do that.
Mm-hmm.
But I think those are a supplement to the fleet carriers, not a replacement for the fleet carriers.
Okay, so a supplement to the fleet carriers. Okay, so in the future, there will always be a massive floating airfield that's over 1,000 feet long and weighs a bajillion tons and is torpedo and missile magnet bait.
I don't know about always.
Okay.
But there will be a successor class to the Fords, I think.
Getting ever bigger?
There will be a larger replacement for the Fords, and probably the Fords themselves and that larger replacement will both also be supplemented by lighter carriers.
Okay. So we mentioned before how long it took the Navy to build all the Nimitz-class carriers and how you can see an evolution change even within its own class. Mm-hmm. So from start to finish. I'm assuming the same sort of thing happens with Gerald R. Ford. I mean, even in the very first ship, I mean, think about all the problems Ford had. It took 10 years
decades
from
worth.
Like initial completion to first deployment, 13, whatever it was.
Like a quarter of the production run of the entire Nimitz class.
Dented. So, okay. So I can only assume that then all those lessons that were learned from Ford's issues are now going to be fixed potentially and built into the subsequent carriers. You already have JFK should be almost, isn't she done?
She should be pretty
almost
close
there
now.
And then I know Enterprise is being worked on. Mm-hmm. That means Dory Miller must also be in the completing stages. That has to be true, right? We should have looked this up. But like every episode, we just wing it. You will tell us in the comments.
And keep in mind, this video is coming out at least a quarter of a year after we were filming it. So
that's true. So things could be completely different
Things
anyway.
could be completely different. We build ships real fast in this country.
No, we don't. It's
not
awful.
anymore.
Yeah. So, okay. So with that being said, okay, so that's not a bad amount of carriers. So, okay. And then we've already talked about another 2 and then potentially another 2, 3, 4 or something like that. You know, maybe 8 to 10, I don't know. Given the issue we have with shipbuilding in this country, just where are you going to build it? Let's not even talk about production of stuff, but just where you could actually physically assemble a ship of that size.
Yeah.
Right. Could you really get bigger? Like, could Norfolk really accept an even larger carrier?
I don't think it'll be significantly larger. I don't think we're going to jump by 30% or 50%, but I think it will get incrementally bigger.
Mm-hmm. Could we even support that? Again, I have a real issue thinking that unless there's some sort of large fundamental change, we did a shipbuilding episode in the fall where we talked about the rehabilitation of the Philadelphia yard down here. You know, so unless there's some sort of joint rehab projects with some of these yards, like if the Koreans come through and just like completely modernize Philadelphia and turn it into some sort of like ultra industrial, like shipbuilding, automated Kia factory or something like that. I don't even know. I mean, would you even build a carrier? Could you even build one of those carriers there? I don't think so, right? I don't think any of those docks could really.
I know Dry Dock 5 could take carriers. I think 4 could as well. At least carriers of like even up through John F. Kennedy was in one of those dry docks at one point. So it'd be pretty close to the modern size. I can't say for certain if it would be full-on Ford size or even a little bit bigger, assuming that they could accept nuclear ships, which they cannot currently.
Okay, well, that makes sense.
But we're talking about a rehab here. And presumably.
Right. So I think there's the biggest. So when we ask the question, should we build smaller carriers? Well, I think there's sort of the part of the answer. It's like in the future, I think the need for smaller carriers will come just through the lack of shipbuilding.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. The United States needs to keep, if we're going to continue our global hegemony, then we will have to have a certain number of carriers able to be deployed at any given time. And the number of carriers we have to have is 3 times the number of stations that we want carriers on, because one will be under repair, one will be training or in transit, and one will actually be deployed.
Right.
So during the Reagan administration, we wanted 5 stations, so we had 15 carriers. And that number has gradually gone down to the 10 where we are today, which implies that we're going to be maintaining 3 stations, which probably isn't enough. There's still conflict in the Middle East. There's now conflict in Europe, and they're projecting major conflict in Asia, which may or may not come to pass. We haven't hit a do or die point with that, but the Navy is preparing for a future war. And so that means those are our 3 stations. If anything else pops up, if the Southern Hemisphere at all, Africa, South America, becomes a problem.
Yeah, those Brazilians, man. I don't know about them. They could, it could be a Russia-Brazil alliance. They could just steamroll South America. Which Battlefield game was that? I can't remember. Anyway, so with a war, a future Pacific War, where the hypothetical projection is you lose like at least 3. So then
I've heard people saying that the Navy could lose 20% of its ships in a war with China.
Of all ships, yeah.
Of their fleet of ships.
Oh, no, yeah, I completely agree with that. And I'm going to slap the at least,
I think that's conservative. I think that's assuming a much shorter war than it will end up being.
Yeah.
If it happens.
I've heard this, but that's one of the biggest reasons why we need like the Constellation class frigates, because you need hulls in the water. Because it's not like a Japanese. It's not like I have got a Baltimore heavy cruiser and I've got hundreds of 8-inch AP rounds. So I'm just going to just start blasting. Right. I have a magazine of cruise missiles, and I know I've got let's just say 16. Okay. If there's 3 Arleigh Burkes over there, well, cool. Then I'm just going to shoot all my cruise missiles at those Arleigh Burkes. I don't have to decide.
Yeah.
But the moment you add in other hulls, like Constellation class frigate, then you have to stop. If you're a Chinese commander, you have to stop and say, am I going to expend these cruise missiles on that frigate, or am I going to wait? Or is the Arleigh Burke the target? Or am I supposed to be waiting even longer for, maybe there's a Tycho out there somewhere still, or or maybe one of these carriers that we're talking about, but you make the decision a lot easier to pull the trigger when you just have fewer hulls. And so that's why I feel like that number is going to be higher, just simply because I just think you're going to lose more Arleigh Burkes and other things.
People have been talking about needing to prepare for this for a long time, and we just haven't stepped up the amount of shipbuilding. We're not building those extra hulls. And
no, and I know
when we do lay them down, it's taking so much longer.
And I know Trump the other week in that speech, said that we needed to prioritize shipbuilding. So, the Navy has needed help for a long time. It doesn't matter who's in office. That's just the fact. The next war, the armed forces budget is typically divided equally. I'm sorry, but the Navy is going to bear the brunt of this war in China. It's going to go Navy, Air Force, Army, and then Coast Guard.
I think the brunt will be different at different times during the war. There will be a time when the Army is bearing the brunt of it, but the Army can build a tank a lot quicker than the Navy can build an aircraft carrier.
That's a good point. Yeah, so you can build 50,000 Shermans.
We need to be focusing right now on building the aircraft carriers. And then when the things seem inevitable, then we need to switch over. These carriers are never going to be done in time. We've got to build more F-22s or whatever the sixth generation fighter is, depending on how long in the future this is.
Yeah.
And then when the shooting actually starts, all right, let's start fielding some additional infantry divisions.
Sure. Right. But as of right now, as we speak, more.
Yes.
You should be, most of the defense budget needs to be going to the Navy for shipbuilding right now.
Because not only will that be the first branch to bear the brunt of the combat, it bears the brunt of the deterrence. A powerful enough Navy may prevent the war from happening in the first place.
Yeah. Just, Theodore Roosevelt,
having a huge army landlocked in the United States.
Yeah, doesn't do you any good. Yeah. Well, again, the same thing applies to the Chinese army. Everything like that. Which is why I think they put so much emphasis into building up their Navy.
Exactly. Their army isn't growing in size right now, but their Navy sure as heck is.
Right. And so I think that's a huge concern and something that should be really telling, but I don't think anyone really wants to. The people who are paying attention, obviously, are not getting through to the people who signed the budgets. But with that being said, are carriers, and again, this is the question of the episode, are carriers too big? Are they too expensive? Or have we shot ourselves in the foot with these super carriers when in reality we need, for every Gerald R. Ford, maybe you get 3 of these carriers that are still the size of World War II big carriers, but there's just more of them. So, okay, maybe they carry a few less F-35s, but if you have 3 times the number, okay, sorry. And then you put those ships out there with the big carriers, and suddenly the Japanese shit.
We've been talking about World War II too much lately.
the new Asian aggressor, China, the captain of that ship has to say, which one do I shoot at? Do I shoot at the big carrier, the little carrier, the crappy frigate, the Arleigh Burke? So it's just having more hulls. It means depleting enemy magazines of missiles faster, because, like I said, no one's sinking Gerald R. Ford with your deck gun. So that's what it comes down to.
So that brings me to one of the first points, or my first of the 2 points that I alluded to earlier in the episode. One of the reasons why we will continue to build big carriers and probably subsequent classes of big carriers is because China continues to build subsequent classes of big carriers.
But are they only doing that because of us? Like is the Chinese supercarrier a direct result in the U.S. super? Because again, like they look, the new one they just built, it's like copy paste. They're like, yes, we like that, build that, But does that mean that it's up to our quality? We had that discussion in the carrier episode where it's like you can copy a U.S. fleet carrier design on the outside, but do you know why our fire mains are run a certain way? Do you know why this compartment is shaped this way? That's why I kind of feel like you still have the advantage. But so if we started building smaller carriers, do you think the Chinese would take notice? Like it's because they seem to copy a lot of stuff, whether it's Naval Institute books, Toyota pickup trucks, or American fleet carriers. They're like the best at copying things, So if we ditched the fleet carrier, would they ditch the fleet carrier?
I think they would still build fleet carriers to get to a parity with us.
Okay.
And maybe not like we've got 10, they're going to build to 10.
Yeah.
But we've got 10, which means there will be 4 in the Pacific. So they will build 4, just pulling that number out of nowhere. But then once they have regional parity with us, I think that we're going to build, we need a 5th one in the Pacific now, which really means building 2. So we've got one for the Mediterranean and one for the Pacific.
Yeah. Do they have to build, knowing full well that they will have to fight us, the Japanese, the Australians, the British? I mean, like, let's just be real. Like, this isn't just this. If something like that really does kick off, it's not a U.S. versus China deal. like the Japanese have been waiting to, unleash the rising sun again, ever since 45. I mean, now granted, it's not like they've got a whole yard full of fleet carriers, but again,
they do have some ships very close to the light carriers that we've been describing.
Right, that's my point. So I mean, so it's so maybe just that,
which China hasn't copied yet, surprisingly.
I was going to say, well, so maybe our allies, the British, I want to keep saying Australia. Do they have anything worth mentioning? Oh shit! I just pissed off a whole group of people.
They're about to get some fantastic nuclear submarines, and they've already got some great frigates.
Wonderful.
With Aegis system.
Wonderful. And then so then the Royal Navy, the British gentleman who shall not be named. And then the Japanese. Okay, well, now you've got some groups of other hulls that maybe can, force someone to decide on.
And South Korea with their fantastic Aegis destroyers.
South Korea, yeah. So, okay,
that's really tough because a lot of the United States' success as global hegemon has come from going to all these wars with these massive alliances that. Largely the executive branch has been able to build up in time of need. Yeah. So the two wars in Iraq, even going back as far as like Korea or Vietnam, where we had Republic of Korea troops in Vietnam and Australian troops, and or like, are we going to get to a point where we're so politically divided that each party is going to pursue different foreign policy needs with different groups of people, and then none of our allies are going to come to war with us?
Well, so I don't know about the European powers, but the Koreans and the Japanese have a mutual interest in this just because of geography, regardless of how they align in that moment with whoever is president.
This is true, which doesn't prevent some sort of global blackmail from being used, whether that's, I don't know what the first strike capability will be in this war, if one side or the other will attack each other via cyber or via nukes or via conventional missiles or some sort of Pearl Harbor attack launched by actual warships and aircraft. I really don't know, but potentially a devastating enough first strike from whichever side launches the first strike, if this war happens, may be enough to convince these other side countries to not get involved.
So in the new title, Red Tide by Naval Institute Press, which was, I was telling you about this.
You were telling me about it at lunch.
Which is coming out this fall. It's written by a author who's done the Jack Ryan series for Tom Clancy. Basically, that's how it kicks off. So the Chinese launch sort of like a two-pronged. So they go full hard into Taiwan, but then at the same time, they've waited until certain units. So like you mentioned, right? Carriers are in transit, are in being repaired. Yeah. So there's a certain moment that they decide that the U.S. Navy fleet presence in Japan is at its lowest. Okay. So they do a two-pronged attack. They go after Taiwan, but then they also hit Japan at the same time. So it's like, so what we just talked about. So now you're neutralizing units in Japan, forward deployed U.S. units as well as Japanese units. And then that hitting those units in Japan slows us down in being able to then directly support Taiwan, which then allows them to take Taiwan and get a foothold there before we're able to then respond. And then that leads to then sort of like a larger sort of Pacific war versus something slightly more localized, like off of Taiwan. Anyway, you can read the rest. Naval Institute Press, Red Tide.
You said that's coming out this fall?
This fall.
And this video is probably coming out sometime this summer, although we're filming it just before spring starts.
Yeah. So you'll be slightly closer to release to Red Tide than we are now. Yeah. But Red Tide.
But pre-sales will probably be up by now.
Yeah. Oh, no. They're up now.
When will then be now?
So, yeah, I don't know.
Soon.
3 months. How many episodes have we done? 4 or 5? So what is this will be done July, August, probably.
But what if we don't release them in the same order we filmed them?
I don't know. That happens every time I do this. Okay. This video will be out before that book is released. I know that for a fact because I control both. Okay. So
you're going to delay the whole book.
No. So, okay. Moving on. So, tangent aside, but in a situation like that, where you have like a Pearl Harbor scenario in Japan, man, karma sucks ass. So, okay. And then you have a dual attack in Taiwan. And the assumption is that a lot of fleet units are under repair and back in the United States. That's a scenario that I think is like worst case, which again is why I think the author of the book does that. Yeah. Where so the units that you probably would have counted on from at least the Japanese Navy. I don't recall what the scenario is about neutralizing Korean assets, but now you may or may not be able to call upon like Kaga or something like that. Crap. And
it wouldn't be a stretch to say that those Korean air defense destroyers are going to be used to protect Korea. If Japan can be attacked, then Korea's worried they're next. So
they're not going to send those screaming towards Taiwan.
Exactly. They circle their wagons as opposed to adding their destroyers to the U.S. fleet. So that, I don't know how it plays out in the book, but it wouldn't be hard to hand wave Korea out of this if Japan's also out of it.
So that's definitely like worst case scenario, but that's also not like out of the realm of possibility either. And I think that's, again, still a problem where even though certain politicians might be able to say like Korea and Japan will be there in this conflict, but then in that situation, they might not be. And then what? Now you're like, well, crap, we should have built those hulls and we should have built those, and then it's like, and then you ring up, Prime Minister, whatever. Hey, can we borrow those carriers of yours? No, go F yourself, like, great.
We need them for self-defense.
Yeah, because,
And at the end of the day, the Royal Navy, the Japanese Maritime Self-Defense Force, the South Korean
Navy.
Just
say Imperial Japanese Navy.
They aren't that big.
No.
A strike that eliminates a British aircraft carrier.
There's half your force.
Exactly.
Yeah. Not a tenth, half.
Yeah, so I could see why one would be resistant to deploying those.
Yes.
Also, a strange thought I just had. I always imagined if we go to war again, then it would be a first strike on American soil, something more like Pearl Harbor in the traditional sense. So whether that's an attack on the Pacific Fleet in San Diego or even attack on infrastructure like bridges, power stations, things like that, even a cyber attack.
Well, so that is a component of the opening of Red Tide.
Ah, excellent.
So you're not wrong. You're 100% correct. But I think the cyber attack happens in Japan in conjunction to like an actual military attack.
So that's what concerns me more now that I'm thinking about this. If the attack isn't on the United States, it's on our allies. The United States doesn't get riled up the way we did when Pearl Harbor's attack.
Yeah, but aren't we constitutionally obligated to help Japan?
But that doesn't mean that...
Which is why we're always like, they're so gung-ho, and we're like, you all need to cool it, because if you provoke something, then we're like, crap, now we have to help you.
Exactly, but there's a huge difference between us being like, remember Pearl Harbor, we're going to forget about all the political differences that have been separating this country for the last several years. We're going to forget about everything else. We're going to just spend all of our money on war bonds and churn out these holes faster than anything, and we're all going to enlist and go over there and wipe them out. If it's like, do we really care about Taiwan and Japan?
Formosa? Sorry.
We don't use the colonial names for places anymore.
Sorry, I've been canceled again. Oh my God.
But are we going to go as hard and as long and fight to the bitter end in the same way that we did against Japan because of Pearl Harbor?
Well, I mean, even by like 44, 45, we were like running out of gas.
Exactly.
And the Japanese knew that. They were like, we're going to lose this island. But if we can take down like 30,000 U.S. Marines, like that'll piss them off so much that maybe they won't take the next island, you know?
Yeah. And it didn't quite work then, but that doesn't mean that China can't accomplish that.
But China, I mean, a country that's exponentially larger than Japan.
More rich in natural resources.
Yeah, has the natural resources to do something like that, and the people resources, like kind of like Stalin-esque, where it's like, comrade, you don't need gun, charge machine gun, Germans run out of bullets, and then you've effectively wiped out the machine gun nest because the barrels have melted and they're out of ammo.
And they have an interesting foreign policy where Japan had 2 or 3 allies during the war. They forced Thailand to help them. They colonized a couple of people. They nominally were allies with Italy and Germany.
Sure.
Not that they were able to collaborate in any meaningful way.
Yeah, send a crate of 20 millimeters by U-boat. That'll help their effort. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. China has not been as polarizing as, say, countries like North Korea, Iran, or Russia.
Sure.
Russia, not the Soviet Union. Russia.
Yeah.
The Russian Federation.
It's the same thing. Whatever.
But also, they haven't pushed those folks away, so they could still count them as allies.
Yeah.
Or they could distance themselves from them. So they've done a really good job with foreign policy, I think.
Well, that's why I think this whole Russia business is so important, because Russia, because everyone, Russia has just become such a dirty word. I've been to Russia. Yes.
Okay. Are you a double agent?
No. I've been to the former Soviet Union. You know, my sister was adopted from there. Okay. I have friends who lived in Russia, and wargaming employees. You know, it's just Russia has the potential to be one of our greatest allies. Again, being that word. And I'm talking pre-revolution. I'm not talking fake ally, like Stalin, sitting with FDR and Churchill, all kind of this is hilarious.
We have similar goals that we need to meet.
I'm talking Peter the Great, okay? And with Russia, with that Western or, whatever border up there in the Pacific, they have a real influence on that. And again, Russia declaring war on Japan right there at the end, people forget about that. Oh yeah, America nuked Japan, they surrendered. No, America nuked Japan and Russia declared war on them. Crap. Maybe the Americans aren't going to charge over here 1 million strong, but that Red Army, man, I don't want any part of that.
Yeah.
Because they are crazy. Okay? The ones who just got done charging all those machine guns and,
the ones who survived that and are now battle hard.
The people who have survived Stalingrad, and then, Zhukov showing up like this is, death of Stalin, That scene where he pulls his uniform tight and about 1 billion medals flopping there.
Well-earned medals.
It's hilarious.
Unlike some of the joke
North Korean guys, so Russia really does have the potential to be our ally. And if they were up there, I think China would have a really hard time justifying any kind of aggression. And especially if China was then cut off from Russian military assets, can we get that new jet so that we can copy it? Oh, no new jet for you, crap. All right. And so that's why I think this whole ordeal sort of in right now with Russia is kind of crazy. Everyone's trashing Trump, you're just pro Putin because you don't want to help Zelensky. It's there's so much bullshit going around right now, but it's I'm not talking about Putin either. Fuck that guy. Okay. Seriously, ex-KGB, the moment Russia gets a new government or a new leader, that's not that doesn't sit there and fondly remember the Cold War, and,
and the old Soviet Empire
you might actually have someone that, is willing to help you out against China. And I'm sorry, but you're never going to get there when you've vilified them to the level that you have now. You know what I mean? And so everyone's so ready to trash. And again, just just chill. But everyone's so really like everyone wants to trash Trump for trying to bring Russia to the table. But at the same time, like they're a nuclear superpower. Like there's only one way this goes. You either make peace and then Russia and Ukraine need to sort of settle their little disputes. Like I get that part, but larger, sort of this, globally, it's Russia needs to be a part of sort of the global economy. Just axing them out is just making them an even worse enemy that I think would just welcome a war between the U.S. and China. We have to edit all this out.
Forget that. Yeah. They can learn about naval history podcasts.
I know. They're listening to this. They're going, we're the bad guys? Like, shit. I don't know. I'm not here to argue about Ukraine. I just it's such a topical thing right now.
Yeah.
And any future conflict with a large power is just setting the stage for that. You know?
And we haven't even talked about the biggest thing about Ukraine that's going to impact our large aircraft carriers, the drones.
Well, right. I think, yeah, the drone, in a very Call of Duty kind of way is coming into its own. It's coming into its age where, yeah, that's going to be a big component in a future war. Just spamming these flimsy, cheaply made, unmanned,
or even fairly large and expensive and reusable ones that could
fair,
take off
fair,
of an aircraft carrier.
Yeah.
That doesn't need to be a fleet carrier anymore.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, if you could make the plane 2/3 of the size, maybe,
because you don't need to put a person in there.
No. Yeah, exactly. You can better package certain items and such. So yeah, no, that's fair. So fleet carrier, maybe not. Time will tell.
My second reason for why I think the fleet carrier is going to stick around is because the carrier aviator isn't going away anytime soon. And those are the guys who are reaching admiral and creating policy. So even though drones will become more prevalent and will require smaller ships, that you don't need a full-size fleet carrier for a good-sized drone squadron, the aviators who are in charge are not going to give up manned aircraft.
So,
and therefore the ships that it takes manned aircraft to operate off of.
So the gun club of the olden days is the, what are we going to call it? The flight stick club? I'm like, I don't know.
And that gun club continues to exist into the 1980s when they're advocating to bring these ships back. So that's 40 years after, arguably, the technology has surpassed them, arguably.
Yeah.
So if we're saying that drones are getting to the point where they're going to be surpassing manned aircraft, maybe in 5 years or so, maybe less, because of more time, like stuff develops faster.
40 or 50 on top of that.
Which
so
probably
you're talking like into maybe like the 21s or something.
Which is probably going to necessitate another class of supercarrier.
Yeah. And then that's when, going back to the museum ship episode, that's when like Gerald R. Ford is retired and becomes a new museum ship when all the World War II carriers have rusted out, as we discussed.
Exactly. And now Gerald R. Ford has fought a war with China, a war with Russia.
Well, let's just say Enterprise.
A war with Brazil.
Yeah. Well, let's just say Enterprise.
Yeah, new Enterprise.
Yeah. We're finally going to save an Enterprise, guys. It only took us 3 times, but we're going to do it. Yeah, in like 2110 or something. You know? Yeah. Exactly. Okay. All right. Well, can we be done before I say anything more ridiculous? And we lose any more subscribers?
Yeah. Don't worry. I don't think anybody made it to the end.
No one did. Okay. Thank you. Thanks for watching. Goodbye. See you next month.